Okay, I think I got rid of it. If not, we'll have to power through. Good evening, everyone. Before we begin, I wanted to thank everyone for making time this evening to join what has now become somewhat of an annual experience. This year is a little different, as everyone's making the joke that this year, excuse me, this year we are all making Sedarim, or we all should be making Sedarim, which for many presents a challenge. Well, I think for everyone it presents a challenge. It presents a challenge in two ways. Way number one is for those who've never made a Seder or never hosted or never facilitated a Seder before. This is your first time, and that can take quite a considerable amount of preparation. So I hope some of that will happen tonight. At least the beginning stage of it will happen tonight. And if this is your 10th, 15th, 20th time hosting or facilitating a Seder, this may be a different environment. Maybe a smaller environment. There's a music playing in the background. Someone. Does anyone else hear that music? Sorry that I'm having so many technical issues. Adam, do you hear that music? It's only in my ear. That's great. It sounds like there's a dog barking in the background. Okay. Okay, I got rid of it. That was very strange. To start again, apologies for that. This year is different because whether this is your first time hosting or your 20th time hosting and facilitating, the nature of our Sedarim are going to be different this year for two reasons. Reason number one is the elephant in the room, which is the virus that is, that we're all kind of facing, we're all concerned about, that we're all worried about, and has been the subject of basically every conversation that I've been involved with in the last 3 weeks. The Seder presents us an opportunity to have a meaningful conversation that both offers commentary on the events of the day and also helps us to think about something else. And the second reason why this is a unique Seder, and doesn't necessarily need to be said, is because this year our Sedarim are just going to look different. Usually our Sedarim are filled with people, lots of family around the table. This year is certainly not going to be the case. So I'm going to try and share something a little bit different than I usually do. Usually I share between 10 and 15 ideas that you can take notes on, you can think about, you can walk away with. And as you go through your Haggadahs, as you go through your Seder and Seder night, you can choose to share the idea, to discuss it, to try and reshare something that I shared with you. This year, I've really been thinking about the opportunity that the Seder presents us and how to capitalize on that opportunity. And I'm going to try and explain a little bit what I'm talking about. And the way I want to explain it is by starting off by quoting Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky was one of the great rabbis of the 20th century with an extreme focus on chinuch, on education. He just understood how children learn, and he understood how education should take place. So in a footnote, this is not part of his main commentary, this is a footnote that he wrote on something, on the Pesach Seder. He writes the following, and I'm going to translate. Ikar mitzvat halaylahu, inyan sipar yisirat Mitzrayim, shahatila hatrachiv al ha'av lesaper lebno. Right, the main mitzvah, the main command of the evening is for parents to instruct their children on the story of the going out of Egypt. As the Rambam explains, eino hagun ma shenohagim hayom shehamorim v'hamorot b'batei sefer melamdim es kol hasipor ha'agadah. So he says, I don't understand what has become custom today for all the teachers, the men teachers, the female teachers, the rebbeim and the morot, for them to tell their students in school the story of the Haggadah, the Chol Pratev, the Talmidim, Kodem HaChag. Doesn't understand why we tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim to all the students before the Chag begins. And afterwards, what ends up happening at the Seder is the child explains the story to the parent. It's not that the parent explains the story to the child. It ends up being the opposite. Hefech kavanas Torah. It's the opposite of the intention of the Torah. Matov haya ilu. How great would it be? Ilu hayu bate hasefer melamdim letalmidim rak et perush hamilot shel Haggadah. How great would it be if the schools only explained to their students, how to understand the words of the Haggadah? V'chol shahar ha'inyanim hayu ha'ikot misaprim lebneihem b'shas amiras Haggadah b'leil Seder. And all the other stuff, all the other stories, all the other details of the Haggadah would actually be achieved, would actually be accomplished on Pesach night at the Seder, from parents to children, from hosts to guests. Kfi meshechayev hadin, just as we are obligated from the Torah. We have a unique opportunity this year to look at the story through fresh eyes, to look at the Haggadah through fresh experiences, and thinking very differently about our world, thinking very differently about where we find ourselves. So I'm going to share a number of different resources. I'm going to share some ideas, not many, some to kind of get the juices flowing, to get you to start thinking about your Seder and how you want to facilitate and run your Seder, with the underlying acknowledgement to run a successful Seder, to run a successful Pesach Seder experience, it takes thought and preparation. We put a lot of preparation into getting rid of chametz and to get the cooking. This year, we're putting a ton of preparation into even just going out and shopping and how we're bringing in packages. A lot of thought and preparation goes into the details, the icing of Pesach, but the Seder itself sometimes lacks that preparation. It lacks that intentionality, and the Seder is screaming out for intentionality. It's screaming out for thoughtful preparation beforehand. So I hope to offer you differentiated tools to be able to achieve that preparation, to be able to at least start the process of preparing for the Seder. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to share my screen in a moment, and everything that I share will be publicly available on the PJC website. I'm going to share my screen, and for those of you who are on the phone, I'm going to describe, or driving or whatever, I'm going to describe what I'm putting on the screen, so you can see it. It's all available on the PJC website, and on a couple of other places. And in between sharing different things for you to look at and for us to discuss, I'm going to share ideas about the Seder, just to frame the conversation and just to enmesh us in and remind us, get the juices flowing, get us ready for what the Seder is, what the Seder represents. So I'm going to start off with the first thought, the first idea or insight, a takeaway from the Seder. We begin the Seder by making Kiddush. It's the first cup, right? We're going to have 4 cups of wine at the Seder, 4 cups of grape juice at the Seder, and straight away we set the tone. We begin by making Kiddush. And this is a familiar act, right? We begin all of our Yom Tov meals, we begin all of our Shabbos meals by making Kiddush. As we begin the Seder this year, and possibly it being one of the smallest Sedarim many of us are attending, it's important to pause and recognize that we are being mekadesh the time that we are spending around the table together, right? Often we view the shul, we view the Beit Midrash, we view the outside as the place of Kedusha, and the Seder insists that we view our table, our home, the Seder, as a holy and sanctified space. From the first moments of the holiday, we leave behind everything that has challenged us. We try to leave behind all the things that possibly this year could have made us exhausted or could have made us sad, right? If this Seder is not exactly what we had hoped for, what we had expected. The challenge of beginning with Kiddush, the challenge of beginning by saying we want to make something holy, is for us to be able to separate ourselves, to compartmentalize the news of the time that we find ourselves in, and say, I'm going to be fully present in this experience, no matter if it's, some people are doing Seder by themselves, or if it's essentially just you and your family. If even though it's not exactly what we had hoped for, nevertheless, we're going to start off by sanctifying the time. Just as the Jews, and this is the idea here, the Jews began the exodus from Egypt by sanctifying their time. The first mitzvah given to Klal Yisrael in Egypt, even before the Seder, before Pesach, was the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. It was the mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon. And so too, if we're going to try to replicate the Yetzias Mitzrayim experience, we're trying to replicate the Exodus from Egypt, we too begin with the act of Kiddush, with the act of sanctifying the space, sanctifying the time, sanctifying the table that we are sitting around. That's the first idea, to set the tone for your Seder. It's obviously very important to think about what you're trying to achieve in tone setting. I'm going to share, hold on 1 second, sorry. I'm going to now try and share my desktop. Just need to close something. I'm now going to share this desktop. Okay. Of course, I can't see it. The first thing I want to show you is this. This is the first source. This is the first tool, first activity that I'm sharing with you. That's not obviously a board or an idea on the Seder, but it's actually a ton of resources to think about how you're going to prepare for your Seder. If you go to pikesvillejewish.com/Seder 2020, on that page, you have a number of different things. As we pause between ideas, I'm going to show to you the different things that we have and kind of explain to you what they are. So the first thing that we have, I'm going to go 2 by 2. First thing that we have is great games for your Seder. This is a list of really fun activities put together for different ages. I shared, there's a lot of games available for the Seder. I shared this website specifically because I was really impressed with the creativity of these 4 or 5 games. And I thought it was not an overwhelming list. So if you have children at the Seder, if you're feeling you want to have fun with some of the adults that you have at the Seder, take a look at those great games. The second resource I want to share, the second tool I want to share, and then we're going to get back to the Haggadah. The second tool I want to share is this, The Four Sons, an article from 1945. Obviously you would go to the website and print this out before Shabbos. This is a great conversation piece. You get to the Four Sons at the Seder, and it usually breaks out into some kind of silliness and who's the Russia and all that kind of stuff. In 1945, a rabbi wrote an article, Rabbi Jacob Pressman wrote an article called There Were Four Sons. He wrote it in the Forest Hills Home News, I believe in Queens. And it's such a fascinating piece at a very interesting moment in history. Right, 1945 was the end of World War II, and you could use this. I would print it out and use it as a tool around the Four Sons to talk about how do our perspective around the Four Sons or around children in general change with the changing times. How do we view the different types of children based off of the different times we find ourselves in? Okay, so that's activity number 2. We're now going to go to the next idea. The next idea in the Haggadah, so I'm going to switch back, as I've said now, I'm going to switch back and forth between an idea for you to share, just to model some of the approach that I feel is compelling this year to take with the Seder. And this is kind of how I'm going to approach my Seder, at least in the first night. And then I'm going to go back and forth between setting the tone and sharing the ideas. So after we say Kiddush, we now reach the the stage in the excuse me. We reach the stage in the Seder where we are washing our hands, where we are performing orchatz. So washing hands has obviously new meaning for us this year. It's pretty much everything we're doing 20 times a day. And we're familiar definitely with washing our hands in a ritual sense, because we perform it every time before we eat bread, before we consume bread or matzah. We wash our hands. But what's unusual about this orchatz is that we don't recite a blessing. We don't say any bracha. So the reason we refrain from this blessing is because it was the custom of the Beit HaMikdash, it was the custom of the temple for you to wash your hands after you dipped anything in water or any kind of liquid. They would wash their hands. And the Gemara in Pesachim, towards the end of Pesachim, talks about the fact that they would make a bracha. And it debates, the Tosfos debates whether that halacha still exists outside of the Beit HaMikdash. When you dip something in water, are you then supposed to make a bracha? You dip you wash an apple, let's say. Do you have to wash your hands and make a bracha of al netilas yadayim? The Netziv, in his commentary in his introduction to the Haggadah, says that this is one of the many actions on the evening that we're engaged in that commemorates the temple era. If you can think about it, there are a number of different actions that are significant around commemorating the temple. And one of the questions is, why is the temple implicitly at the Seder and not explicitly at the Seder? Even Korach at the end says Zecha Mikdash Kehillel, right? We remember the Mikdash like Hillel used to remember the Mikdash. It's not that we're remembering the Mikdash; it's we're doing what Hillel used to do. So there's this subtle tension between wanting the Beis HaMikdash, having the presence of the Mikdash, but it also not being explicitly present. So one of the big questions around Nirtzah to discuss is, in our heightened awareness of a heightened sensitivity towards cleanliness, what role does spiritual cleanliness play at the Seder, and what does it mean to be spiritually cleansed? What does that look like? How does that act? I will add one short idea. The hands in particular play a very, very important role in general in Judaism, but specifically at the Seder. We wash the hands multiple times. We hold things, we uncover things. The hands is a sign of action, and the Seder is supposed to be a sign of a very active, very engaging experience. Someone once pointed out to me a cute idea. The gematria of yad, the numerical value of the Hebrew word for hand, is 14. The other gematria for other hands is also yad, is 14. You add 14 and 14, it gets 28, which is the gematria of koach. Chaf ches is 28, showing the necessity for us to figure out ways to connect with each other in a very significant and very meaningful way. I'm going to share another idea as it relates to the next step in the Seder, and then we're going to go back to our tools. Excuse me. Next step in the Seder is karpas. This is one of the favorite moments of the Seder. I remember as a kid being really, really hungry at this point, and my father, who's a rabbi, announcing, you're not supposed to eat so much of the karpas because then you have to make a bracha achron, and you have to make a blessing after the karpas, and you're supposed to still be hungry for later. And I remember looking at my mother desperately, asking her to share some karpas with me. And we had this like contraband karpas. We used to use potatoes. We still use potatoes. We had this contraband karpas like being shoved under the table, so I wouldn't be famished. I'm pretty sure my father knew about it. So what is karpas? Karpas, all the sources essentially tell us that karpas is an act that we take to facilitate children asking questions. Right? Children asking questions is a central theme. It's a main theme of the Seder. And it's almost, we have to provoke them into asking questions. We're going to talk about this a little bit later as it relates to the Manishtana. why we have to provoke them and why we just give them the questions as opposed to getting them to ask the questions. One of my greatest experiences as a parent last year was when we came and sat down. My kids were all around the table. Our guests were on the table. We were ready to go, and I walked out to get my kittel. I put my kittel on. I walked to the head of the table, and I sat down. And straight away, my son, at the time he was 6 years old, straight away he said, "Abba, why are you wearing a kittel?" And I kind of looked at everyone and I said, "Okay, we're done here." He asked the question. Now we can end the Seder and get to bed at 9:45. We didn't do that, but the whole point is questions. Karpas is an active question. So what is the act of karpas that initiates questions? The Gemara, the Rashi and Tosfot, Rashi and Rambam, Rashi located in Pesachim, also the end of Pesachim, and Rambam actually have a machlokas, they have a debate over what it is about karpas that provokes questions. Rashi believes that the act of eating a vegetable so early in the meal should raise questions, and the Rambam believes that the act of dipping your vegetable in the water is what raises questions. And I wonder if there's more there to think about how we provoke what are the things that provoke different children to ask questions. That being said, we do karpas so early in the Seder because it reminds us of the first steps, the first moments of the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exile, the Galus Mitzrayim, the exile in Egypt, when the brothers of Joseph took his coat, ripped his coat off of his shoulders, and dipped that coat in the blood of a goat and showed it to the father. Karpas, if you look at Megillas Esther, it uses the word karpas to describe a fabric. Chor karpas or tcheles, Bargman, to describe Achashverosh's party, had all these special fancy fabrics. So karpas may actually translate as a fine fabric. So what we're doing is we're taking the fine fabric, like the brothers, we're dipping it in salt water, we're dipping it in tears, maybe the tears are the tears of Jacob, and we're beginning the story the same way the story began thousands of years ago. Okay, we're now gonna go back to the screen. I shared with you Great Games for Your Seder, Four Sons, an article from 1945. Excuse me, I'd like to share with you two more articles now. One is the Chief Rabbi of England, I think, has a really beautiful and uplifting message for the Seder, and some very practical suggestions in how to run a Seder this year so that it's meaningful for people, and considering and thinking about doing one or two pieces of the Seder earlier in the evening before the Seder begins. He actually suggests, interestingly, to do karpas before Pesach begins. An hour before Pesach, do karpas with everyone on Zoom, like we're doing now, and that can be like the kid Saba and Savta experience. So it's worth just taking it. I think it's a 4-minute message. It's worth taking a look at because I think he has some great ideas. Seder Jeopardy, I'm going to click on just to show you because this takes some considerable preparation. It's Seder Jeopardy. You should print it. That's the thing that takes preparation. The thing that's a little bit annoying is it doesn't fit on one page. It's a great tool. It's a great game to play over the course of the Seder, especially if you are leading the Seder. You want to be. He should live and be well. What's his name? Steve Isaac knows. What's the Jeopardy's guy's name?
Alex Trebek.
Alex Trebek. He should live and be well.
Off mute. Yeah, it's Alex Trebek.
Thank you, Steve. I knew you'd know. He should have a refuah shalema. It sounds like he's doing okay. But if you want to channel your inner Alex Trebek, it's great. Like the trivia at the Seder is wonderful, and this is a pre-generated Jeopardy game. If you're looking for other Seder Jeopardies, if you don't like this version, just Google Seder Jeopardy, and there's a ton of stuff there. I'm going to share with you one other resource before we go on. All the way on the left here, fun Pesach songs to learn before Yom Tov. These are fairly basic, but because, and I included these because they are basic, I included them because our Sedarim are going to be smaller this year. It's going to take everyone to sing together, with a certain amount of intensity to be able to make the Seder feel the way it does when you have a lot of people around the table. So it may be worth over the next week or so playing these in the background to get whoever's going to be at your Seder excited. Excited for the days ahead. Okay, I'm going to go back to the Haggadah. I'm going to, just so you know, I'm sharing these ideas. I'm going to give you a tool at the end that has a summary of each of these ideas and some more ideas I'm working on in the days ahead. Excuse me. So we just covered Karpas. We're now up to the part of Yachatz. Yachatz is a very strange moment in the Seder. We've done Karpas. Everyone's had their snack. We're ready to go for the story. We're ready to start out. And then all of a sudden, the person leading the Seder picks up the middle matzah and breaks it in half and hides a piece away and puts a piece back. And we always get distracted, right? It's a very simple, very quick thing to like kind of move past, kind of ignore, especially because it actually all becomes about the Afikomen and it doesn't become about the Yachatz experience. But the Yachatz experience is one we should definitely this year, and I think every year, we should pause and consider in its significance. Generally, we are highly protective of what's called Lechem Mishnah. Lechem Mishnah is the two chalot that we have. If a challah is incomplete or if a matzah is incomplete, you cannot use them to make the bracha of hamotzi over them to start a meal on Shabbos. You need two complete matzot or two complete chalot. Of course, this year at Seder, we will ultimately have two because we have three matzahs. So we break the middle one. So we do ultimately have two complete matzahs. But in general, we are incredibly protective over these matzahs, right? We have shmura matzah. We have matzah that is watched. The flour is watched from the moment that it is harvested. The wheat is harvested till it gets into your home. The shmura matzah is watched over. We pay a premium for the matzah. So the question is, right? I had a friend who used to kiss the matzah. I tried to do it one year, and it kind of ruined the matzah. But I had a friend, when you take the matzah out of the box, you kiss the matzah because you're about to do a mitzvah d'oraisa with the matzah. So the first thing we do, right? It's like walking into the equivalent is walking into shul on the first day of Sukkot and biting off the top of your esrog. It makes no sense. The matzahs are precious, and we should want to protect them. Why is the first act that we undertake breaking the middle matzah? Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Rimon, who has a wonderful Haggadah, I'm going to recommend a couple of Haggadahs throughout the evening. Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Rimon is the Rav of, I believe, Gush Etzion, or Alon Shvut. He's Rav of Alon Shvut. He has a beautiful Haggadah, multiple versions of the Haggadah, so some are more intense, one is a little bit lighter. He writes the following. He writes that at this stage, the first stage of the Seder, before servitude and before the story of redemption has even begun, we await the Afikomen. We acknowledge how the story will end even before it begins. This models for us what faith can and should look like. We sacrifice our complete matzah because we know that God will redeem. God redeemed the Jews in Egypt. He will redeem us today as well. We know even now in our own private homes that with our own private struggles, God is a redeemer. And so what do? We break the matzah knowing that in a couple of hours from now, we're going to put that matzah back together, knowing from a couple of hours from now, we're going to find the Afikomen, right? The first question my kids ask when they sit down for a meal is, what's for dessert, right? What are we having for dessert today? The first thing we do before we start any kind of Seder is we say there is a dessert, and dessert is geula, dessert is redemption. It's very important to acknowledge before we start talking about Avad and Hayinu, before we start talking about Lechem Oni, before we start talking about all the suffering and all the other stuff that we're going to be talking about, we've got to acknowledge that we know how this story ends. We know how our story ends because we know of how that story ends. And so That is the place where we begin. We then jump into Magid. Magid is obviously majority of our time on the evening of Pesach. There's another beautiful Haggadah that I want to share with you. So many people have it. It came out a few years ago. It's called The Night That Unites. It's a combination of three rabbinic personalities who had a tremendous influence, have a tremendous influence on us even until today. But they had a tremendous influence on the 20th century. Rabbi Kook, who was the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel, Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of Yeshiva University, and Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. So Rabbi Kook starts the Magid section by wanting to know why stories are so important, such an important part of Jewish life. It's ironic because Magid, we share a little bit of the story, and then we actually dive into like technical, halachic, legal parameters of the Seder. So we almost don't spend much time actually retelling the story, perhaps leaving us space to tell the story ourselves. But Rav Kook says the following. He once noted that the likelihood of a people staying together, staying united, staying a nation, without a central land or a central gathering space, that the likelihood of maintaining that unity is low, right? If you don't have a shared purpose, if you don't have a central land, if you don't have a place where people get together, societies have come and gone in the absence of these critically important venues and features and ideas. The challenge to remain connected as a community, obviously today, is really high because the reality that we find ourselves in is one without a communal space to gather. So Rav Kook suggests that one of the communal spaces we gather is around the Torah, is around mitzvot, it's around the observance of Shabbat, it's around keeping kashrut, and around the other mitzvot of the Torah. Additionally, I want to suggest that one of the places that we gather, one of the ways that we gather, is by sharing stories, by sharing experiences that have happened to us, is by reflecting and thinking about the national stories that have happened to us, and is sitting and saying, Avadim hayinu lefar b'Mitzrayim. Let's think about the first moments where the story of the Jewish people began, and let's understand that our unity is protected by having a shared Torah, by having shared mitzvot, and critically, essentially, by having shared stories. Stories that are common to us, and also stories that are individual to us that we share with each other. I remember the experience, and this is something to reflect on at the Seder, if this has happened to you, with your intimate Seder this year. I spent 5 summers in a camp called Camp Hask, which is a camp for children with special needs. It's a very special camp. And in that place, you have to go through quite an extraordinary summer. It takes a lot of Mesiras Nefesh, it takes a lot of difficulty to go through that experience. So after the summer, you go back to your life and you kind of resume your own life. And at the end of the summer, you get this Hask sweatshirt. You get this sweatshirt that says Hask across the back, and it's kind of a little bit of a club that you're part of. I remember walking Manhattan a couple of weeks after going to Hask, wearing, I think the Isaacs were at Hask, maybe even the Isaacs met at Hask. I don't know if I made that up or not. I remember walking in Manhattan a few weeks after the summer and seeing someone else wearing the Hask sweatshirt. I didn't know the person, but I felt like I was a kindred spirit with that person. I felt connected with that person because we essentially, I could assume the person had a very similar experience to me. And that's what it means to share a story. That's what it means to be unified, to maintain our unity and connection with each other, is to be able to know, and there's power in this, to be able to know that almost every Jewish household across the world on the first night of Pesach is going to be sitting around their Seder table, whether it's individuals, whether it's a family. They're all going to be sitting around and doing what we're doing. They're going to be sharing the same stories that we're sharing. Okay, I want to go back to this page. The next thing I want to share is, if you're looking, so we did, excuse me. we did fun songs for Pesach. If you're looking for a little bit more of an intellectual Seder, right? If you're looking, there are some people who are having the Seder alone, or an adult-only Seder. There are some great resources here at the Pesach to go. These are some of the most insightful and interesting minds in our Jewish world that are worth paying attention to. I would highly recommend Rabbi J.J. Schachter, Rabbi Jacob Schachter, Rabbi Yaakov Glasser, Dina Rabinovich is excellent. All of these are excellent. Take a look at this section before Pesach. Choose 5 or 6 of them. I'm happy to make more recommendations if you're interested, and download and print them and read them as part of your Seder experience. They are thought-provoking, they ask great questions, and they are on various different themes. One of the other great resources here is, it's not only this year, right? 5780 is this year's articles. It goes all the way back to 5766, so that's a while ago. So look through all the articles that are here and see if there's anything here that piques your interest. And as I said before, plan, right? Plan for what you want your Seder to look like. If it's not going to be a child designed Seder, then utilize something like Pesach to go to keep yourself engaged and interested. I have another resource here, and it's relevant to the Seder because if you spend all your time before Pesach cleaning and worrying about cleaning for Pesach, you're going to be too exhausted to be prepared for Pesach, to be prepared for the Seder. Excuse me. So I do believe I actually shared 2 resources here that I think are valuable. One is a series of videos made by a colleague of mine in the 5 towns, Rabbi Yaakov Trump. That's really his name. It's interesting. A series of 2 to 3 minute videos, really, really fantastic videos. Basically, any questions that you have, I'm happy to answer your questions, but I'm probably going to actually just going to go to this this YouTube channel to figure out the answer to your question. So if you want a quicker answer, this is resource number 1, and resource number 2. You'll forgive me for the irreverence of this, but resource number 2 was let me stop that. Was John Krasinski is coming out with a new news channel called Some Good News. So if into the run-up, it's very entertaining. It's a great distraction. If you're getting overwhelmed by cleaning, overwhelmed by the news, I would recommend taking a few minutes out to clean out your mind, to refresh yourself, and it's a 15-minute great show, and he promises to be putting out some more shows. Must be one of the only rabbis who encourages you to stop Pesach cleaning, stop cooking for Pesach, and spend some time watching John Krasinski. Okay, back to a couple more ideas. We're going to do this for about another 10 minutes or so, and then I will share the final takeaway. Okay, so we're up to Magid. We begin the Seder, and Magid is going to be something that's actually going to strike us quite drastically. We begin the Seder by offering an invitation to guests, right? The conclusion of Halach Ma'anya Diachla Vasan Ba'aradim, right? This is the bread that our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt. Anyone who is famished, anyone who is hungry should come and eat. Anyone who is in need should come and partake of the Paschal Lamb. Every year we say this, it feels disingenuous because we're already sitting around the table. And what does it mean to invite someone you don't want to be that guy who turns up at the table after people are already sitting, and then you have to squeeze in a chair. So it feels disingenuous. And this year, it actually feels downright inappropriate. To be frank, we're not supposed to be sharing our Seder tables with anyone. We're not supposed to be even having guests over, or grandchildren or grandparents or cousins or uncles and aunts. We're supposed to be having, as much possible, our Seder with just the people we find ourselves with now. So pronouncing this, however hard we try on the night of the Seder to ignore the news of the day, to ignore the elephant in the room, this is going to smack us in the face, and it's going to feel disingenuous. So the question is, what are we doing here? Why is this here? It's a question that comes up every single year, but I feel like the question is way more intense this year than previous years. Rabbi Soloveitchik has a beautiful essay that analyzes the mitzvah of hospitality, hachnasat archim, the mitzvah of having guests, and he wonders aloud, what is it about hachnasat archim, having guests, that is so compelling? Why has it become so definitional of the Jewish people? And he takes us all the way back to Avraham and Sarah, to Abraham and Sarah, and says this was the value that defined them, that distinguished them from the other families, from the other nations of the world, right? If we look at the stories of Avraham and Sarah, right, their tents being open their tent being open on all four sides, so they could see wherever a guest was coming from and invite that guest into their tent. That was a profoundly anti-cultural, countercultural thing for Avraham and Sarah to do. The prime example of how societies at that time treated guests was Sodom, right? When a guest came into Sodom, the Sodomites used to have their way with the guests and treat them incredibly poorly. Avraham introduced the idea of hachnasat orchim, the idea of hospitality into the world. It was a deeply countercultural idea. And Soloveitchik says what the idea that Avraham is really introducing into the world, and this is a really critically important value for us to operate our Sederim with. The idea is that we don't know everything, is that we should have some self-doubt about our opinions and about our values. We should be open to hearing different perspectives. And the mitzvah of hachnasat orchim, the mitzvah of having guests, is actually the mitzvah of being a listener. It's the mitzvah of saying, you know what, I want to hear what you have to say on such and such issue. It's the mitzvah of saying, I have my beliefs, but what are your beliefs? What do you believe in? What do you think about? What's on your mind? And that's why I think we begin the Seder with the mitzvah of hachnasat orchim, not necessarily because we can achieve that mitzvah. We certainly can't achieve it this year. In fact, because of the situation, there's a mitzvah not to achieve it this year. Right? Our willingness to explore other people's perspectives sets a tone for what the Seder should be. Right? When you have a slave and a master, the master doesn't care at all about the perspective and the experience, and certainly doesn't care about the opinion of the slave. The first act of freedom, the first act of geula, of redemption, is for us to say, what do you think? Convince me otherwise. And it's an ancient tradition. It's probably the first Jewish tradition. The first Jewish tradition is debate, and that's why our halachic and Talmudic debate, the Talmudic discussions, are filled with people with differing points of view. And that's why this year, even though our Sederim may be smaller, we have to stop and we have to say, if you're at our Seder, if you're sitting with someone, or even if you're not sitting with someone, right, we have to recognize and take the opportunity to recognize the value of sharing space with someone else and understand what it means to share space with someone else. Doesn't mean, right, someone put it to me this way: a leader of the Seder is not the person who leads the Seder, but it's the person who facilitates the conversation at the Seder. Right? Your job isn't to tell everyone how it should be or what it should be. Your job is to enable others to have a voice. I'm going to share one more idea, and then I'm going to wrap up the conclusion here. Let me just check. Let me just select which idea. Yeah, I'm going to conclude with this, and then I'm going to, you know what, actually, let me show you the final tools that are available on this website, and then I want to conclude with the last idea and a commitment. So there's a couple more tools here I'm going to fly through here. It's a 3-day Yom Tov, and if you are worried about what you're going to do for 3 days, excuse me, if you're worried about what you're going to do for 3 days, you're also not going to have the time to prepare for the Seder. You're going to be consumed by the idea of being stuck at home for 3 days without any electronics. So I started preparing the following resource, which actually a friend of mine took over. These are recommended board games and card games broken down by age appropriateness, and a link where to buy them. So if you're going to get a game for the 3-day Yom Tov, I would order it now so Amazon can get it to you before the Yom Tov begins. There's a ton of great material here. I think it's good for any time, especially now that we're in the middle of isolation. The last other resource here is actually this video, how to prepare a Seder plate, and how to prepare basically your Pesach Seder table. Also helpful, it's a little bit basic, but it's a great reminder. At the bottom here, there are 3 other resources. One is a Pesach bingo, a pingo game that also a good friend of mine prepared. She actually updated it this year for the coronavirus, so watch out for that. And then at the bottom, there's this website that's very popular amongst Manhattan Jewry called bangitout.com. And they, almost every year, I haven't seen it this year yet, but they prepare a great Seder plate, a Seder primer, about 20 pages of interesting stuff. So at the bottom here, you have a page full of jokes and a recommendation. Go around the table. Everyone should say a joke, each section, and some really interesting questions and information about the Seder night on the left here. Questions, everything. That's really valuable. So you can click on it and you can print it out, I believe. If you click on it and you print it out, use that at your Seder. The last thing, I've said this to the end, only because it's in formation. Safaria is a wonderful website. If you don't know Safaria, it's a great website. Safaria has given people access to the Haggadah and given people the ability to add their own comments to the Haggadah. So all the ideas I shared with you tonight, I've actually included in this link to the Haggadah. So for example, Kadesh here, right after Kadesh, you make Kiddush, then is a comment by me, Rabbi Yechiel Shaffer, the idea that I shared on Kiddush. There's Orchatz, right after Orchatz, RYS, the idea I shared on Orchatz, Karpas, the idea that I shared on Karpas. I have not completed this yet. I'm working on it as quickly as I can, but I hope in the coming days, we'll email it out. Let's say next Monday. It'll be fuller than it is today, although there is already quite a considerable amount there. And so whatever ideas I share with you today, right? The goal of this isn't for me to give you 20 ideas and you can walk away with prepackaged, ready to go stuff. The goal of this is to give you the resources and the tools to be able to do your Seder well. If you come back to this on Sunday, Monday, you'll have a full Haggadah with ideas. I want to show you one other thing that I included on each section. I included the idea over here of the section, and I concluded a question to consider. Right? I didn't share the question in this group in this presentation, but as you're trying to prepare for your Seder, I've presented the idea, and then I presented a question for you to discuss. Should you want to discuss it? And there are different levels of questions. Some are kid-oriented, some adult-oriented, some are both. So I'm trying very hard to give you different ways, different mediums to be able to engage with each other and to engage with yourself, really, at the Seder. I want to conclude. Thank you so much to everyone for spending time here this evening. In the last minute, I want to conclude with one idea. It's a section of the Seder that we don't spend a lot of time looking at. We kind of fly through it because it gets very technical, and we want to get to the story. We're hungry. We want to get to the singing. So we get up to the section called Master Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shua, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Nazar, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, Shahiu, Masubim, B'nai Brak. Again, this is going to be a little bit painful for us because we don't have that freedom to hang out with our friends over over Pesach this year. Sorry, 1 second. All right, Terry, I'll answer your question in a second. It's going to be challenging to see these people getting together and having a Seder the way we expected. So the underlying question is why, according to Judaism, is groups so important, right? What is the power of a chavrusa, of a study partner? What is the power of a chabura or a study group? So the Gemara in Brachos, towards the end of Brachos, teaches that studying Torah in solitude, studying Torah by yourself, will lead you to more likely forget the Torah than you would have studied it with a partner. Rav Kook expands on the idea and suggests that it's the battle over truth, right? When divergent, as we said earlier with the Kol Difrin Yosef Yechiel, with the invitation, right? When divergent views are expressed and heard, when the sages have to represent the ideas to a discerning audience, do we find that knowledge and wisdom deepens, right? When you have to debate something, when you have to think about something, when you have to interact with someone and make your position and listen to their position, that's when you get to see things from different perspectives. When you seclude yourself, when you cut yourself off from society and from people, you actually also cut yourself off from insights that comes from others. Ultimately, this undermines our learning, it undermines our ability to grow in our wisdom and our insight, and that's why this year presents for us such a challenge in that we're going to be doing our Sedorim in isolation and social distancing. And the challenge is for us to prepare in advance as much as possible, to engage with each other in advance as much as possible. Right? If you have an idea, you have the phone and call someone, share it with them and hear their perspective on it in advance of the Seder. And that's my underlying message this year. It's my message every year, but this year is so critically important. The Seder is different this year than ever before, because our expectations are different, because the possibility of being disappointed is a real possibility, and we have to be very deliberate and put a tremendous effort into being prepared to make the Seder something that will be unforgettable. Right? We'll talk to our children, to our grandchildren, to future generations about the Seder that I just had with my partner, the Seder I just had with my husband or wife, the Seder that was just the kids around the table. Right? If we can enter the experience through that light, we will, please God, have a Seder to remember. I want to conclude, and I've included this in the Haggadah because I think it'll be powerful to read this on the Seder night. I want to conclude, and then Terry, someone asked me a question. I want to conclude by reading a poem. I've always wanted to be a poet, and I'm not very good. So I'm going to read a poem from Maya Angelou, a poem called Alone, which I think it will be very profound for us to read at our Seder this year. She writes as follows: Alone by Maya Angelou. Lying thinking last night how to find my soul a home, where water is not thirsty and bread loaf is not stone. I came up with one thing, and I don't believe I'm wrong, that nobody can make it out here alone. Alone all alone. Nobody but nobody can make it out here alone. There are some millionaires with money they can't use. Their wives run around like banshees. Their children sing the blues. They've got expensive doctors to cure their hearts of stone. But nobody, no nobody, can make it out here alone. Alone all alone. Nobody but nobody can make it out here alone. Now if you listen closely, I'll tell you what I know. Storm clouds are gathering. The wind is gonna blow. The race of man is suffering, and I can hear them moan, because nobody but nobody can make it out here alone. Alone all alone. Nobody but nobody can make it out here alone. By Maya Angelou.
Sure.
The challenge this year is our Seder itself is going to be limited to the people we are currently with. And so whatever preparation you can make in advance, whatever work you can do in advance to prepare your Seder, to connect with people around the ideas and the thoughts that you are going into the Seder with, will make a huge difference to making this the most memorable Seder yet. Someone asked, will it be possible to have just the commentary of the Seder and not the Seder itself. Just the comments that I write, I'll create a document where you can just print, and I'll include a link on the website, so you just have the commentary. Anyone have anything else they want to share or say before we call it a night?
Is all of this going to be on a website for us, all of these links?
Yeah, all these links are on the PJC website. The website is pikesvillejewish.com/Seder 2020. It's also going to be a link to this page is going to be on the homepage.
Okay.
I'm also working to actually put more stuff up on here. But at very least, I think this is a really good starting place. And there's just a lot of resources available here. And if anyone else has other resources that they want to add to this page, I would love to include more stuff here. Anyone else have any other questions or thoughts? Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I hope everyone is healthy. I do want to make one plug. A Saturday night, we're going to have another program Saturday night. Shabbat Hagadol. Traditionally, the rabbi gives a great speech. This year, we're going to be separate. So I hope Saturday night at 9:15 to 9:45. I hope to share the life story of Elijah, of Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. We're not going to have any guests at our Seder this year, except we're all going to have the same guest. We're going to have Eliyahu who's going to turn up at everyone's Seder. And the question is, why does he turn up at our Sedarim? Why does he have to spend his life, the rest of eternity, going to every Jewish household that hosts a Seder? His life is magnificent and thought-provoking and challenging, and I hope to share his story and why he has to spend his life visiting us the rest of eternity. Please God, everyone will be healthy. It'll be a Pesach to remember. I really do appreciate the few minutes that everyone joins this special evening. Chag Sameach, everyone. Everyone should have a very, very good night.
That was good.
This